See people starting to come on. So let's go ahead and get started. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa O'Brien, and I'll be your host today. Welcome back for our fourth episode of our second season of our Get a Grip webinar series. We have another webinar this month and have invited two new speakers to join us for a conversational style format. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to introduce today's topic, which is Unpacking Depal, Pros, Cons, and Candid Talk with John and Jose. We will focus our discussion around technology evolution, economics and integration, and workforce impact. So a couple notes before we get started. If you have a question, please put it in the chat and we'll address them at the end. Also, we're recording today's presentation and we'll send a follow-up email to everyone with the link to the recording. So with that being said, let me advance here. Please join me in welcoming our guest, John Crimmins. He is a senior solutions architect for +1, and Jose Hotema, sales application engineer, also at +1. And I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves, starting with John. John, please tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at +1.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, beautiful. So my name is John Crimmins. As Lisa was saying, I'm a senior solutions architect at +1 Robotics. I've been in the industry for a decade plus or so now. Started out actually in Walmart logistics divisions and worked at Dematic, Vondelanda, and worked at Amazon Robotics before this, as well as worked at a startup called Vicarious, which was acquired by Google a bit ago as well. So really I've touched a lot of different areas in the warehouse environment. So really excited to kind of talk about, Depal and how it's changed over my time in the industry.
Awesome. Thanks, John. All right, Jose, you are up. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Jose. I have been in the industry for about 4 years now, and I would like to think of myself as the guy in charge of really finding out what didn't work. I come from a QA background. Breaking things, breaking robots, things like that have always been a passion of mine. So now being able to apply that to solutions, when I approach a problem, I'm genuinely coming at it from a place of what works and what does, and a lot of times mostly what doesn't work. So I'm very excited to talk about, yes, a lot of pros, but also, address the elephant in the room with the cons.
Cool. All right. Thank you both for being here. I'm going to show the audience our agenda here today. So, we had our welcome, introduce our speakers. I'm going to show you a quick video, and then we'll get into the discussion. So let me go on to this next slide. Here we go. Okay. If you've attended our past couple webinars, you've probably seen a video similar to this, but I do want to give this, show this to you. This is Depal 1, a turnkey portable work cell for automated palletizing and depalletizing needs. And it lends context to today's discussion. So it's 30 seconds, but I want you to get a chance to see this. And I'm going to mute this too. So this is what we call Depal 1. It's our with a cobot. You can also get it with an industrial robot, but it's a portable, flexible solution that is easily dropped into a warehouse and a great gateway for those coming into the automation, who are integrating automation for the first time. Okay, let's get into it, guys. John, let's start with you. You've been in the industry for 10 plus years. How have Depal offerings changed?
Yeah, and I love you sharing that video because something like that I would have never dreamed of seeing, 10 years ago when I started. One of the biggest thing that's honestly changed is the cost to get into like a Depal cell. When I first came into the industry, Depal was actually a manual process and not, Depal was not thought of as using a robot to do this. And if you even wanted to attempt to use a robot, you had a very fixed system. It was probably $500,000, if not more, in today's dollars, trying to implement that. And it was always a custom thing. So there was no plug and play systems you could add for Depal. The other thing that I would always think about that was odd for Depal is, to me, the bigger market for Depal was not in robotic back in the day, but was in ergonomic Depal stations. So creating an area for people to do it more ergonomically versus today, we're looking at a lot more automation as opposed to just doing things ergonomically based on labor availability.
Nice. Jose, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, even as a consumer, not just has the actual technology around Depal changed, but also the kinds of packages that robotic systems have to handle, right? As the economy has, essentially catered towards ordering online, right? That has become the de facto form of purchasing. All sorts of things now can come through your mail, right? Everything from candles to liquids, maybe juice boxes, right? The types of packages that Depal systems have to handle have also expanded as online shopping has, grown exponentially post COVID.
Jose, I'm kind of curious, when you first started, was Depal, was Vision always a part of the Depal experience, or is it like Depal was kind of, unique and on itself? You kind of talked to me about like the Vision, tech part of it when you first started.
Yeah, so I think whenever I first started in the fulfillment world, Depal was mostly, very rigid boxes. The box dimensions didn't really change. It was pretty much consistently, 4 feet by 6 feet boxes, and that's what you stuck with. Your pallet sizes were very homogeneous, very clean and organized. As online shopping has, evolved, these pallets can get really high in their variability, right? The Not to mention, because you're trying to like get things out the door,
Mhm.
when you're building these pallets, you're just stacking them like with whatever. We
Mhm.
call them rainbow pallets, but realistically that to the common operator, that's just you getting your job done, right?
Uh, yeah, it's the thought of using Vision to accomplish Depal when I first started wasn't even a thing. Or if it was almost similar to how it is today, where you buy a very basic Vision system and then you have to do controls programming to kind of like make it work. So I'm kind of excited to get into how, today's Depal is different than 10 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. I think with the vision, with once we added vision, it really was from a place of necessity, right?
Mhm.
Because as palettes got a little bit crazier, you couldn't just fit the exact same piece of the puzzle into the exact same slot every single time. Vision definitely covered that gap for the variability in the stacks.
Cool.
So this is a great segue into the next question I had for you, Jose. The cost of these systems have changed over time as well. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think traditionally, whenever anybody thinks about robotics, they're thinking these industrial machines that are caged, locked away in a different part of the building with very to little human access. Luckily, with the advancements in technology, specifically around the cobot applications, you can now have a cell that is entirely without any safety fencing, much lower price point, with still a lot of the same capabilities that industrial robotics has. So it has, and honestly, like as technology continues to evolve, and hopefully, like as more people adopt robotics and cobots in general, the more the market will incentivize cheaper robots. Very similar to like the early days of electric vehicles being very expensive. Over time, as more people have desired them and the market has wanted them, the cheaper they have also gone. So currently, with the existing cobots that we have, that is it's a much easier price point. There's no safety fencing that you need to like commit to. So I think it's really democratized accessibility to robotics.
Right. And even just the time and labor to integrate these types of systems too, right, is a great money saver. John, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add in that we always think of, cost as, what's the capital cost, the acquisition cost to get this piece of hardware or technology, but part of the cost is also just, in your operations, what are you not delivering to your own customer? So I always like to think of, you don't need a fully automated system to, add automation. You can automate 20% of that, and you can basically have what I always like to refer to as like a baseline rate that the robots kind of keep doing. And you still have people then to come in and augment and help make that better. So again, cost is more than just simple dollars and cents, but you're right. Like again, going back to the last question, when I first started, these systems were $500,000 or more, right? And now that, even plus one selling some as low as 155,000, that's like just, a huge market shift to me just in my time in the industry.
Right.
Right.
Great.
I agree.
John, since you have the most experience on our panel, what is the biggest hurdle for a middle-sized business owner to actually integrate one of these cobot Depal cells?
Uh, to me, the biggest hurdle will almost always be there's kind of two phases of this. Is number one in the before you even I'll call it like purchase the product is getting buy-in from other folks there. I think a lot of people that we interact with at some of our customers, we talk with the automation teams a lot, and there's not as many times either buy-in or conversations happening with the operations folks, which is a tale as old as time, right? Somebody buys automation, they say you can go and implement it. Well, more and more, somebody has to implement this and do the work. And so to me, I think that is one of those big hurdles that happens in any size business, right? Specifically to the, these medium-sized businesses that you're referring to, for those folks, you really got to make sure that the ROI is going to be there, right?
Right.
Like I was saying before, if you have a $500,000+ sell and you're only making, we'll say 10 million in revenue a year, you probably don't want to spend a 500,000, will this work or will it not, right? So that lower cost point is actually a big deal to somebody like that can try something out as opposed to trying to, do a full system. One of the things I'll also add in there is the system that you showed as well, Lisa, the Depal one, can actually be rolled out of the way. So a lot of the automation solutions that I used to work on were very fixed. They're bolted into the ground, and once they're there, they're not moving for 10 years plus. These systems you can try them out, and if they don't work or you're using somewhere else, you can roll them to a different spot. So to me, again,
Yes.
the biggest hurdle is definitely making sure you have ROI and doing your homework on that.
Yes. And small and middle-sized business, they just have like a lot less room for error, right? So
Right.
they are going to be more mindful of their decisions. Jose, did you want to add? I want to give you a chance to add on to this if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think coming from a family of, a small business, I think you're right. I think the ROI definitely is, if anything, is a little bit more critical for smaller businesses and small to medium-sized businesses. And one piece of advice I would give any smaller medium business owner when they're thinking about automating or implementing robotics into their lines is to really look first internally at their systems that are already in place, right? I think a lot of times you can get a little distracted by the glitz and the glam of the technology. What that looks like for us when we work with our clients, we do a little bit of hand holding in the beginning just to do some of those internal analyses, usually covering what kind of packages are they getting. Are you getting mostly boxes throughout the year? Are you getting marketing? Are you getting changes in because of marketing campaigns, changes in the types of products that you're moving, right? If all year you're moving books, and then suddenly in the fall you start moving maybe more clothing lines, you might need a solution that can, to some degree be adjustable. And that's where I think essentially like systems like our Depal one, which when you implement them, even if you install them in one side of the building at the top of the year, and based on your internal tracking and all of this work we did up front, that come Black Friday, you're going to get a lot more clothing. You can move these cells pretty easily, just with the pallet jack over to a different side of the building. So I think knowing your own package distributions, knowing your own high seasons is a big part of the game. So just I would say that is a big hurdle. A lot of people, even though it is their own business, sometimes they just haven't taken that time to go into it with that much granularity.
That's something
Yeah, and there probably hasn't been a need to before either. But anyway,
Right.
John.
No, I was just going to mention that this is still true 10 years ago as it is today, but you always need to do that prep work up front and just say, what are your materials to be handled? What are your flow rates, right? And like you were saying, Jose, like what's your seasonality? You got to understand those things just to make sure that any of these systems, let alone, one like the Depal one system can achieve an ROI or not.
Right. Regardless of whether it's one season or the other. I do think that's also another, when people look for technology, they sometimes look for the worst case scenario. How often is worst case scenario actually happening? Right. I think that's another good metric to look at.
That's good. Jose, can you talk about some of the cons you've seen with regard to integrating Depal systems in brownfields?
Yes. So luckily, I've been part of a lot of installs, especially in the early days of, the first few days when a system gets set up. We'll come in and, we'll set it up to where the customer can hit the green button, let it start running. And within the first week, we are usually called back on site for one particular thing. And it's usually because the system itself has maybe working, just as intended, but anything downstream and upstream hasn't actually been tuned to work with our system. So I would say a lot of downstream processes also need to get updated as you implement one big piece of automation. For example, a cobot with a depalletizing solution. A lot of times the downstream effect is that now those people or the people who work downstream of this robot are seeing a lot more volume, right? Or even there's even certain um, procedures that need to be followed. For example, they kind of forget that robots don't necessarily stop. So we've seen that in places that have shifts of 4 to 6 hours. People will usually take at least a few minutes of break time. A lot of times people will keep the robot running. And so when they come back, they have this overfill downstream of packages. So I think one of the biggest challenges during the early integration days is not just accommodating the person running the robot, but also the people around the system, before and after the solution has been implemented.
Yeah, and I love some of these smaller practical examples too, because one of the things you never think about is, especially if you've been running a facility for so long, is like, what are the speeds of my conveyors, right? So we've seen this before where, the speed of a conveyor might be like 80 feet per minute, but it needs to be 100 or 120 to make like a robotic system work. One of the things that people, most folks don't realize is that, humans kind of like moderate our workflow to downstream effects already, right? But robotic systems are not like, you can't just tell a robot to dynamically slow down constantly, right? You can, of course, include like a photo eye and make that happen, but nobody wants our process to go slower. And so one of the things we've seen for sure is we got to check downstream to make sure, all right, how fast is the conveyor running, right? And there's, we can get into examples all day like that where what are these little small things that we need to change in the processes, right, for the integration piece.
Yeah, and just to kind of recap on that again, that also happens upstream. Sometimes the robot can be what we call starved, and if there's not enough flow into it, that does taking a look at if where we placed it in the building is the correct placement for at least maybe, again, like we're talking seasonal, right? If the robot isn't being fed enough packages, it's never going to meet that ROI, right? Because it's mostly just staying stagnant. So I think that's another big challenge is getting packages into the robot area, whether that is through a conveyor or sometimes it's a lot of forklift, specifically for Depal, right? It's the forklift systems that come in, making sure people are trained on, how to keep those robot fed.
Okay. Shoot, I feel like you guys answered my next question already about upstream and downstream. I know that's your wheelhouse too, John. So John, I'm going to ask you. Oh, I'm going to ask you the next one.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I was going to add to that one that Jose was like just hinting at there a little bit, but it was a little bit of kismet today because I just saw an article from a Harvard Business Review about automation going on, and there's a quote that I wanted to read that I thought was just great for what we're talking about here, and it's technology does not deliver value, people do. Automation will only succeed if the workforce is ready for it. And so, like Jose was saying, like we can automate as much as possible in your facility, right? Our vision and technology can see tons of different things. But if you don't give it work to do that, right? Or if you're not designing that process appropriately, it's not going to do the work. And so we're dealing with that, the number of customers today that we're kind of talking about in this process of, the pre-engineering process to say, all right, what needs to be done now and to ensure that your people are ready for this automation? Because if they don't, if they're not the ones going to help deliver value, like the automation won't deliver any value as well. So we're talking about like upstream things, like a lot of times folks talk about the upstream and downstream of like you have a robot cell like this Depal unit, and like the upstream might be, like trailer unloading, and downstream might be in the conveyor. There's upstream like business processes and alignment on the, automation teams and operations, right? So going back to we talked about before, like getting operations teams to not only commit, but having a champion there to learn how to do, add value with this automation system. So again, all those, like also happen too. But I thought it was like just so great that, an article came out yesterday that would apply to our conversation today.
Yes, and it's just theory versus application, right? All
Yeah,
right,
right.
John, so now that we need people to manage the robots, what kind of skill sets does one need to be able to do this? Do companies need to hire specialists, or can existing labor learn these skills like they would learn to use any other machinery on site?
Yeah, I think this is really great because a lot of folks think of the robotic systems, meaning that like your job is going to need to be replaced. More often than not, it's almost always it just changes. And these skill sets that are there can be learned by folks that are already in the warehouse. So you don't need an entirely new workforce to work on a robotic system. I will say the one big training that will be needed is for like a maintenance staff to learn how to repair a system like this. So an example might be like we have we give guides to all of our cells on how to repair them or how to clean them. And one of the big ones is cleaning the robotic gripper cups to make sure that, when the cup gets too dirty, the suction on it doesn't work as well. So make sure you clean those fairly often. But the folks that are working there today, they become, instead of doing like a Depal person that is grabbing items and tossing items onto a conveyor, they now become the person that's either directing the number of robots, ensuring that there's uptime, in that area. And they're more using, as opposed to their legs and their arms more, they're now using their brain a lot more to figure out how to keep their area operating. So I would say folks that are there today can all learn these skills. And as far as training goes, the maintenance staff and getting them to be up to speed on how to repair these systems mechanically are probably the big things that need to happen.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that because I think fundamentally one of the reasons that I enjoy being in the robotics industry itself is simply because of my acknowledgement that humans are special, right? It's taken us years since the foundation of this company to essentially pick up an item and put it back down, right? That's the beauty of humanity. Humans are so good at doing these tasks. They have not just the capacity to grab things, they have the capacity to see things and think about things. So when I think of automation and some of the things, I believe it's important that businesses who are looking to automate also invest in people very early on. I think in that same article that John mentioned, there's another quote that says, "Nothing is more manual than automation." There's
Yeah.
a lot of hands that go into making an automated system successful. And one of those things, for example, is like for example, Yonder. Yonder is our human in the loop, right? It's one of the it's us accepting that AI will never 100% be the be all end all. And I think being able to train people to, not just like you said, mechanically or train on supporting robots, sometimes it can be just as quick as helping its decision making, training models, and let's say that's not everyone's cup of tea. Some of the workforce that is freed up from, like physically moving things, physically moving these packages can now focus on, again, looking for ways to improve processes, right? If you've worked that line, you kind of know the heartbeat of the package flow. You kind of know how things are supposed to run. You as a human have a certain like intrinsic knowledge of how things should operate smoothly. You can spend more time, thinking about ways to improve your process, the logistics of the facility.
One of my favorite examples of this happening in one of our customers was we installed a system. It was supposed to operate at like we'll say 450 or 500 pph, and we're getting some data back on the system operation. And all of a sudden we see them operating at 200 or 300 pph, and we're like, oh my gosh, we need to go to them because there's no way they're happy with this system. Of course, we come to find out that again, this is one of those like, operations versus, automation teams. The operations team just started to throw all the heavy items at the robots because they're like, yeah, people don't want to work with these things. And so, of course, they put all the heavy items over there and they did all the lighter items. And so, sure, it wasn't meeting their PPH requirement, but it's like people are much happier with the fact that they're like, yeah, I just do move items I'm comfortable moving as opposed to, 30-pound bags of whatever, right? So anyway, we can get into lots of
And then
examples.
you get higher satisfaction rates from your employees, right? You've got
Yep.
less injuries, so there's savings there as well.
Mhm.
All right, so guys, I have one last point I want to discuss here. How can automation improve employee satisfaction and turnover at the operations level? I feel like we've already kind of touched on it, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
Yeah, I'd say, damn, what a great tie-in. Good job, Lisa. No, I mean it's true. I mean, like I was thinking about this today for this question of, you know, I use a calculator, I use Excel, I use a design software program because
Yeah.
sure, back in the day they did everything by hand on a, pencil and paper, but guess what? It's like it's way easier to use these tools that I have today to, do my job, right? And the same I think is going to be true for, a lot of the warehouse operations when you're saying, all right, how do I want to do my job? Do I want to physically handle these things and go at breakneck speed, or do I want to manage a system of robots and ensure that they're all doing the work correctly, right? I think most of us can, answer that ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. I think a lot of engineers go through the drafting part in their college career where they're forced to learn how to draw things by hand. There's a certain pride in getting all those pencil stains on the side of your hand.
Yeah.
And then you're finally introduced to, some modeling software and you're like, wow, this is great. I think the same experience can be said in the deployments that I've been at. One of my first few installs under Plus One Robotics, the first week I saw people definitely, seeing this big machine being installed, and naturally, people would come by and ask like what it is. And funny enough, I think Plus One Robotics actually embraces that, and we teach them very early on that this machine is to support them. And very early on, we get them, playing with touching the buttons, making sure that they understand how the robot is supposed to move. And one of my favorite parts of the job is when we're leaving those install sites is seeing these, the people who are in operations, right? I'm not talking C-levels. I'm not talking the people who write checks. I'm talking about the actual boots on the ground with these robots, using them, and even asking, how soon can I be assigned to this role? And then maybe a year later, hearing back from operations and hearing them say, hey, we'd like to install another one. We might not have the purchasing power of, some of our higher ups, but ask the operations team, we have a certain budget. Can we get another one? And I think that is such a unique experience to see people who maybe at first are a little, I don't know, the new things can be a little bit scary, but as you get used to that, seeing them, fully embrace the technology and even want more of it. I think that is a very unique experience. I think people who do manual depalletizing, when they see 8-foot high pallets and they know they're going to have to get on a ladder, do some overreaching and potentially put themselves at risk, when they see that these robots can handle tall pallets like that, they definitely see that as a tool. And I think getting visual confirmation is such a nice part of this job, essentially.
Yeah. I like to, when I'm talking to non-industry folks, I like to refer to robots as a tool. I sometimes think we just need to reframe the verbiage, because back in the day, a restaurant would hire lots of dishwashers, right? Well, now they make dishwashers. We've got dishwashers in our homes and in restaurants, but guess what? They still need to hire dishwashers. It just makes the job a lot easier, right? So it's a process that still exists, but it's a tool to make the job just, a little bit easier and faster and give you back some time.
Yeah,
so,
agreed.
All right. This has been really insightful. So thank you both for your time, gentlemen. As a reminder, you'll be receiving a copy of this webinar via email. I want to see if there's any questions. I've got some announcements, but before I move on to that, I want to see if there are any questions from the audience for us.
Don't be shy, guys. Feel free to address the room.
Comments?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, I just lost my Teams window real quick. I do want to turn on my camera so you can see me.
Oh, nice.
Hi, I'm Claire.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. This has been really helpful as a student who just graduated and is trying to learn more about robots in industry. I thought you covered a lot of good points, and Lisa, I thought you asked a lot of really great questions. I'm curious. Well, I thought I guess something I hadn't thought about is how challenging it is to integrate the robot with the rest of the systems that factories have in place. And I was wondering what in your in the partnerships that you've had or the clients that you work with, what part of that typically takes the most time or is the hardest in whatever way you want to quantify being hard?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. John, do you want
like, is it the automation or is it the integration? Like making for a custom automation solution, is it making the robot do really well, do its job perfectly, or is it integrating it with the rest of the system?
Yeah, sure. I can jump in there. I think honestly, the biggest thing is integrating it on the site. We have a number of projects that were both custom automation, but also we plus one of those products that we deliver out to the field. And the hardest part for sure is when you take a standard product out there and try to apply it, and how do you kind of ensure that's operating like as it should be, right? So I think that is normally the longest thing in a process. And some of them, aren't that long, right? Like sometimes you can get out in a week or two, right? But whenever you have like a new customer with a new process who's new to automation, right? You're probably going to be there for a couple of weeks, kind of helping them learn and integrate and teaching them how something should work, as opposed to maybe they had the different interpretations of how it might work. So integration for me would be the hardest one.
Yeah, just to add to that, I agree that it is integration, and on the technical side, that is very much the hardest challenge, right? Like we were talking about upstream, downstream. What happens before us, or what happens after us, or what happens before the robot, what happens after the robot? But I would like to add a second factor to this, and it's basically what a lot of engineers fear, right? The robots are very consistent. I would almost say the robotics is easy. It's the people that are hard. Why do I say that? A lot of times when we're integrating, and especially as the end user is not just hiring Plus One Robotics for one part of their solution. We're just we're essentially the robotic system in a full assembly or in a full line of automation. So what that usually means is working with not just the end client, but a lot of times other customers, other companies, right? The person that makes conveyors or sorters needs to have a good line of communication with Plus One Robotics, who makes the robot. The person who makes the bulk end feed also is usually a different company. So I agree that it is integration, one, because of the technical aspect, but now add to that mix different companies, different people, different interests. I think as the engineer, sometimes that is the harder part, or that is the scarier part. The robot is going to work the exact same way it worked last week. How it integrates with other parts of the system, and how we get to that end goal as a multifaceted solution. I think that's always a good conversation to have up front, like establishing good lines of communication.
Got it. Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for your question, Claire. Anybody else have any questions for our panel? All right, I got a couple last minute things. If you do have something, please put it in the chat. And all right, so we're on the road, and this is where you can find us coming up. So we'll be at Pack Expo next week. I will be there. Jose will also be there. It'll be in Las Vegas. Every other year it swaps out, right? So Las Vegas next week. You can find us in the Schmaltz booth with our Depal 1 solution, and Yaskawa's booth over in the West Hall. And we'll have an induction cell there as well. Then we've also got a team that will be at Venture North in October in Milwaukee. And then if you're a part of the MHI organization, we'll be at the annual conference, and that is in Tucson in the first part of October. And let's see. Okay. And then here's how you can sign up for our next webinar. If you like this one, we'll have John back next month to join us, and he's going to talk about robot relay, how AMRs and ARMs team up for smarter automation. That's going to be Wednesday, October 22nd. So the first QR code is where you can go to see our whole lineup for the season. And then if you want to register for that webinar in particular, that would be the second QR code. And that is it. All right. So we are a little bit under time, and I think that's okay. It was a great discussion. And again, I want to thank our panel for being here, and then thank all of you too for joining us. And we will see you next month. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.